All right, it looks like we're live. So I'm gonna shift a little bit. Our geographic layout for this video is a little bit weird. So for those of you who don't know my friends, Jacob and Shannon, there we go. They're married. They also like rules, and they also like vampire. So we're gonna do what I said earlier, and basically just kind of have ourselves a read through of the new Masquerade Volume 2 book. It's an expansion on the By Night Studios Masquerade LARP system that if you're watching this video, I have to assume you already know about. Just sort of have to.
Really like
yeah, well, this is my gaming filter. Anyway, skipping that whole tangent. So yeah, this is an expansion to that. It's really focused on clan merits and on techniques. And then it has a lot of sort of storyteller utility that's added to that. What we're going to do here over the course of however long we feel like doing this, and you all keep watching, we're going to start out, we'll do like first impressions of the book, just how we feel about it right now, and then we'll talk about some specific mechanics from the book, some merits. We're going to kind of skim it and go through the ones that catch our attention or caught our interest when we were first reading it. And you'll just sort of get, we'll chat about it and do feedback and thoughts and concerns. Yeah, and then if that doesn't carry us to the end of the night, fuck it. So first, we'll just do first impressions, and I'll start with Shannon. Having gone through the book, what are your first impressions of it?
So I haven't really gone through the book.
Okay, get out.
Mostly,
no.
I was mostly yelled at about the book by these two for the better part of 2 hours.
At least.
It sounds like there are some good stuff and some mess stuff. Doesn't sound like there's too much just horrible stuff, which is good, I guess. So, yeah.
For those of you not familiar, Shannon is pretty much going to be playing our Costello in this video.
What does that make me?
Bad. So speaking of bad, Jacob, your first thoughts? That meant to be bad about him, not the book. I actually like the book. To skip ahead, I thought it was really good, but sorry, Jacob.
There have been times when I've been overwhelmed by something, and there have been times when I've been underwhelmed by something, and I think I was exactly whelmed by this book. Which is probably better than what I was expecting. I thought this was going to be really bad, and overall, it hit about the middle of the road for me. There are about half a dozen things that I just vehemently hate, but when is that not true? I can learn to live with it. And there are quite a few things that I really loved and that I think will actually make games better. I was concerned that when this book came out, I was going to start to lose interest in Vampire, and instead, I'm feeling kind of excited.
Okay. For those of you who've never done something like that with Jacob, that's about as close to a ringing endorsement as you get outside of Symbaroum, which forever hallowed be its name. Best system ever written. Symbaroum is. I feel like that's really burying the lead for anyone who just jumped on the video at that moment. Best system ever written. It's my first impressions. It's not that. I will say, I don't want to say anything super mean or negative because I'm friends with a lot of people who worked on this book. I know it was a labor of love. And like I said a second ago, I actually really, really liked it. I think I went into it with pretty low expectations overall. I was nervous. I've not really been a fan of, I wasn't a huge fan of APOC or Changeling. From a mechanical standpoint, I thought they were pretty rough. But going into this book, I kind of expected a lot of that. I expected to be pretty frustrated with it. And I will say that, that first couple of mechanics hits you like a punch in the face. Overall, my main takeaway is the power level in this book is substantially higher. I think it's done in such a way that there's a lot of optimism for the next books that are coming out. But it definitely, like the power level ratchets up at least a third on average, maybe halfway. It's a pretty big jump in power. So that's something to bear in mind while we start reading through these powers is you're going to hear shit right up front. You're like, whoa, no. And if you, like we tried to do, kind of restrain that final judgment until you get a little further, what you'll find is that though the power level is ratcheted way up, it's done in some interesting ways, and it's done for some clans that I think we've all thought for a long time could use the love. Particularly, our big takeaway here is rare clans got some love. Weird clans got some love. Any clan that is more likely to be played as an NPC than a PC got some love, and some of them got a lot.
There's long been a very big problem in Masquerade where rare or even uncommon clans really only exist to make the pillar clans cooler. They are the opportunity to teach interesting disciplines. Ravnos exists to teach chemistry to Toreador so that Toreador can use chemistry for cool things. And that's part of what the politics of Kemery is supposed to be about, but it's always swung a little bit too far in the direction of making the pillar clans the only ones that are fun to play.
Sort of, yeah, a simple way to put that is that being a pillar clan literally comes with privilege. And if you're voluntarily making a character without that, who's still part of that system, as in terms of game design, you want there to be something good, some real virtue in making that choice, not just morally or narratively, but mechanically. You want to reward players for doing the hard thing. So I think that's a good sum up of our general overview of how we felt about the book, our approach into it. Because of who is doing this, obviously we're drinking heavily. I have, if you've never done a vodka Red Bull with their coconut Red Bull, it's blue. It's coconut, and they're just like, fuck it, blue. He's drinking rum. They're thinking about putting Coke in it. Shannon has wine somewhere behind Jacob's massive elbow. There it is. So yeah, this will get less coherent over time. So if you're here now,
I recommend you grab some drinks to go along, because, like I said, overall positive, but some of these powers you're going to need it.
a little bit of social lubrication may help some of these powers go down. So with that, Jacob is almost done pouring his drink. He's very slow.
Okay, so we're going to just start to go through some of the mechanics and talk about the ones that we think are interesting. Always there are going to be some that just aren't worth discussion. Yes, we're going to go in order the book, and we're going to skip the errata because I haven't checked to make certain, but I'm pretty sure there's nothing there that wasn't already on BNS's website.
Oh, as a quick note while we're doing this, if you don't already know, Jacob and I have read this book cover to cover now. There are a couple of places where he skimmed and I did the homework. There are a couple of places I skimmed and he did the homework. But we have looked at the whole book, and you're going to kind of get it the same way that we got it in our group chats today of just like, oh, did you read thing? Oh, did you read thing? Which is even worse because Jacob and I read at exactly the same speed. And so we would fall behind only by sending text messages to be like, did you read thing? And in the time it took them to send that, I had read it. Or vice versa. Every time I tried to text him, he was, yeah. Anyway, point is,
however bad you imagine that based on his description,
it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. No matter how drunk we get on this video, it will be easier to understand. Speaking of, Jacob, first merit.
So before I get into that, there is one very important thing that I need to front load here, which is that Masquerade has adopted, don't do it. Masquerade has adopted the APOC policy of giving a 1, 2, and 3 point merit to every clan. And they have done so with both the clans and every bloodline. Possibly a little bit of overkill. You can be the judge after we've gone through this.
We'll be the judge.
We will be the judge. But what's important is that they put in a limiting factor that has been one of the main things that's made me happy with it, which is that if you take the 1 clan merit from this book, you are not allowed to take the 1 clan merit from your book, from the first book, which preserves the core idea of merits that Masquerade succeeded with, which is that they force you to make difficult choices about your character.
When we were discussing it today, the thing that basically came out of the conversation is, if you're going to remember one or truly understand one thing about merits in this system, it is that merits are the quantification of opportunity cost in a way that XP usually isn't. And that's the one thing. There are a lot of places where I don't necessarily agree with the changes, or even that they stayed the same, but that is one place that they absolutely nailed it. Opportunity cost is everywhere in this book.
Which means one of the things I'm going to be pointing out as I go through and look at different merits is what merit you're going to have to give up you want to take this one. We begin with an Assamite 1-point merit, and we're beginning in the wrong place for what I just said because, hey, real quick, anyone remember any of the Assamite merits from the first book? You shouldn't. You shouldn't.
They had bloodlines.
Bloodlines.
So our first merit is the one that felt like a punch to the gut, the Blade Whisperer, which, by the way, on point naming.
There are some great names in this book.
The Assamites were meant to be assassins, and this restores that idea. When an Assamite attacks someone, you cannot assist defend that attack. That's not right. You can. You can do whatever you want. You are a free K-Knight. But your assist defender is not going to do squat.
Yeah. To clarify, assist defender just doesn't stop them. So you jump in the way of the sword, they're like, nah. Which reminds me of a story of the time. Nope. Bad story. Killed somebody in somebody else's arms. Anyway, moving on. Point is, that merit is our 1-dot merit for the Assamites. You can't stop them from hitting their target with assist defender. And that right away sets up the vibe of the Assamites in this book, which is that they are fucking assassins. In the first book, they're fighters who aren't really that special. They're not bad. They're good, even great. They're not special. You know, they don't feel different from a Bruja or a Gangrel or whatever you're fighting with. In this book, they are assassins.
The only thing interesting about the Assamites is that they're the only ones who can really make melee weapons work. And now, when an Assamite decides that a single person is going to die, that person will die. The Assamites aren't the soldiers. They aren't the stand in a line and fight together. But an Assamite decides that that huddled mage in the back of the corner is dead. No one is saying otherwise.
We're going to have to figure out like a moderator, like 30-second time limit on these speeches.
We are.
They're going to get long.
Yeah.
Shannon, throw something at me.
That would have been really cool for Red, honestly, to be able to do that. I'm probably going to say that a lot, not about Red, but about all my characters.
Yeah, well, and there's definitely a lot of what Jacob alluded to of like, oh, this is exciting. But yeah, just flat out, that's the 1-dot for Assamites. We're not going to go through every mechanic, but I think there's at least one more Assamite merit that we really want to talk about.
Yeah, so let's talk about Trials of Blood, because that sets a pretty big pattern in this book, which is that getting additional in-clan disciplines is much more common in this book. In the first book,
Core book. We'll call it the core book, and this is our first edition.
In the core book, you had Nosferatu could get any, and then you had a series of maybe 3 or 4 other clans that could easily get access to an additional in-clan discipline. That number has doubled.
It's almost everyone.
One of the cases
pillars
is your ability. Oh wait, I got that wrong.
I think
So
Yeah, this one
the
is
Assamite Warrior is a different pattern that shows up a little bit less often, which is Trials of Blood is an exception to the technique Elder Power rule. I always get twitchy when core rules start to get broken, but this is one of the ones that I think works, which is that you get one exception to the restrictions on technique or elder powers for your generation. If you are a 9th gen, you may buy a single Auspex-based elder power. If you are an 8th gen, you can buy 2 Auspex-based elder powers. If you're a 7th gen, you can buy a single Auspex-based technique. Some of the obvious implications, I read a lot there, so Joe, give me your first thought.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you've got your basic implications. You're going to have, because weapons in general get better in this book, even though range doesn't get hugely better, you're going to see 7th gens walking around with Bullseye. You're going to see a lot of 9th gens hitting you in the face with Psychic Assault, because 9th gen is when they can bid 17 on that, which doesn't matter as much anymore. We'll talk about that later. Still matters. And as like having played a 9th gen of most of the major clans, like it'd be pretty cool to just walk around hitting motherfuckers in the face with Psychic Assault, because nobody expects that. So I think that's one of the really cool virtues of it. I agree. When I first read that, and every other place I've read that in this book, it makes me deeply uncomfortable to have that divide be crossed, because one of the things that used to be sacrosanct and is not now is the idea of clear delineation and balance across social categories. So a lot of people will argue whether the system was always balanced across generations. It was. Or who got the advantage in the case that it wasn't. 11th gens. But in general, there's a lot of debate as to whether or not it was balanced across all of those. But it was usually, by everyone who knew what they were talking about, was agreed that it was balanced across the general social classes of basically 11th gen and below, 8th and 9th gen, 7th and 6th gen. Were kind of those were the categories it was balanced across. There's something a little wiggly about 9th and 8th, which we could talk about for a long time. But just in general, that's what it was balanced across. If you were in the lowest category, you got all the social controls, you got all sorts of really cool tricks, you had access to everything. You just had more XP your XP went further than anyone else. Exactly. The 8th, 9th range is much more about, usually that's where you find your best thugs, who were just all about thugging. That's where you find your really, really intense technical builds for techniques. Lots of people who are just, moving on a 24 and they can follow you and beat you to death. That's where my favorite auto kill technique combination, whichever one, Fearful Blow and the Sabat merit that allows you to Executioner, combined with Relentless Pursuit, which I said in a really slow, ugly way, but basically what it amounts to, it's a 3 mechanic combo that lets you, if you can make 2 chops successfully, beat someone to death in basically the middle of the room, and there's nothing they can do about it. And that's the sort of thing that you saw at 8th and 9th gen, of these really, really technical, like, my build takes a while to explain. And then 6th and 7th gen, where I picked a thing and I'm going to eat you at it. Just whatever the thing is you do, I'm better.
Now, what I will say is that, and for the record, I'm not going to bother saying I agree with everything Joe just said, because it wouldn't say anything else. But I really like that there is some amount of flexibility being led into the system in a very controlled manner. Very well controlled. You're getting a single additional power that is outside of what you would normally be able to buy for a single discipline at a 3 merit cost. In exchange for what, awakening the steel is what you're losing.
So yeah, and that's kind of what I was driving at, is that to me that balance was always sacrosanct, and it was based on a very rigid delineation of role. However, this book kind of doesn't give a shit about that. Whether it is your opinion that that's because the authors disagree with me on that, whether they don't care about that, whether whatever, that's not really relevant. What matters is that this is very clearly not following that dichotomy.
Shannon, do you have anything to add to that?
I kind of think it's interesting that the technique cost is 12 XP. I'm wondering if it might have been better to put it at 20, which is what it costs for 8 gems for elders to get it, but
Well, so I think that's a good point. I think the reason for that is probably XP costing 20 for 8th gens is the rarity limiting mechanism. We talked about XP isn't really opportunity cost represented all the time. In that case, I think it really is. It is in time. It's expensive enough to force opportunity cost. Since we're already enforcing that with a 3 merit, probably all right. So can you pick up Horrid? Okay, we've got a question. Can you pick up Horrid Form or Armor of Cain's Fury for 3 merits?
No. Merit point, it's not that merit points are allowing you to access disciplines. This is a specific case that's coming up in a couple of different clans. Right now we're talking about Assamites, where you get a single exception to your generation restriction on buying techniques or elder powers. So for example, an 8th gen can buy 2 elder powers with this merit, or a 7th gen can buy 1 technique that is specifically always related to a single discipline.
Yeah, it's always tied to whatever
it has to be Auspex related. An Auspex elder power or a technique with Auspex as a prereq.
No, you're good. It's not a dumb question.
Yeah, that's good to bring up.
So yeah, the merit is not you get to pick a power carte launch. It's specifically you get to pick a technique along these limited lines or an elder power along these limited lines.
Now, something I'll call out as a specific restriction and then ask for final thoughts before we move on is this does not apply to luminary powers. And luminary powers remain one of my big concerns.
Yeah, I'm very
because luminary powers are going to be where, in a lot of ways, the writers cut loose and just try to add raw power to the system. And we've already seen a lot of very significant boosts to power in this book. So we'll see about that.
And luminary powers are gonna change what 6th gen are.
Yeah,
fundamentally.
So I think we're good on that. We can keep rolling on powers. We're still in the Assamites.
Assamite sorcerer. Every bloodline in the book got their own set of merits. So we are gonna have to just jump around here.
We're gonna skip a lot.
But Assamite sorcerers got a 1-dot merit that also got repeated a whole lot within this book for very good reason. There are a lot of different bloodlines that got access to thaumaturgy in the core book. And the pattern was they got one defined path. Sorcerers always got Lure of Flames, Khulduin always got Elemental Mastery, Setites always got Corruption, so on. Setites,
the RMA. No,
Setites weren't really a bloodline. That was kind of dumb, but whatever.
The merit cost and the benefit were the same.
They got a second path that was of their choice. Whatever they wanted, they were able to get that. That was okay, but for a lot of bloodlines, that was very limiting. Every bloodline that got those 2 paths of thaumaturgy has access to a 1-point merit that gives them another 2 paths of thaumaturgy. This merit cannot be taken twice, like thaumaturgical expertise, but it means that the Khulduin and the Assamite sorcerers, who per canon are meant to be thaumaturgical masters who are capable of competing with the Tremere, can get up to 4 paths that make them actually hypothetically able to compete with the Tremere.
So we'll reverse order this time. Thoughts on this power? We'll start with Shannon. So by the way, the reason to cut her off as soon as I gave it to her, the reason why we're reading this power, even though it's still in the Assamite section, is as Jacob mentioned, this applies to basically any sorceress bloodline. All of them come with that. So basically, if you can have 1 or 2 paths of Thom, you can probably have 4, with no exceptions off the top of my head, barring some rarity tricks. So thoughts on this power, Shannon?
I definitely think that's gonna be pretty cool because very few people, except for people who were Setites, ended up like taking these bloodlines for thaumaturgy purposes, I think, and now it's really going to allow them to be a bit more creative with it, and so they don't have to just stick with, oh, I have leather mastery. That's great. That's my trick.
Jacob?
Yeah, I think that the book did a really good job at still allowing the Tremere to be the uniquely dedicated to thaumaturgy clan while still letting other groups shine. We'll talk about the potential of combat thaumaturgy when we get to the Tremere, but suffice it to say, BNS did not neglect them as they added to thaumaturgy. But there was never a good reason to play a sorcerer. There were a couple of good reasons to play Khulduin, but mostly it was just that you already thought the Khulduin were cool. Letting people come in with the tricks and builds that require more than 2 paths, one of which is picked for you by the bloodline, that is some much needed love shown to these guys.
So I will actually take the contrarian view on this one. I actually don't like this edition for a couple of reasons. The first is very petty and very spiteful, but I hate people who talk about Tremere builds. because there's only kind of three classes of it, right? There are the people like me who love them and think you can do some really interesting magical shit with them. That is a fun and confusing and intricate build. Then there are people who think Tremere are way too powerful. Actually, we'll skip to them at the end because I hate them the most. There are the people who think the Tremere aren't good enough, which is not a super common complaint, but you get it from some people. Usually it hinges on they don't have Potence, Fortitude, or Celerity in Clan, which is a valid problem to have. Like, that sucks. Doesn't make them underpowered. These are
Malkavians don't either.
We can still fly. But yeah, and then the third group, the group that I personally hate the most, are the Tremere are way too strong because they get all of Thumb. Now, I will agree, Tremere are one of the strongest. They just are, flat out. But most of the Pillar clans are in that category, right? So when you're operating at like 750 XP, there is one Tremere build that will beat every other build. If you want details on it, ask Rob Paul. He ran it in the CAM Chronicle, or the MES Chronicle, or whatever. But in general, below that, when you're at like the 300 to 400 range, or where I think the sweet spot of 200 to 300, there are a lot of really powerful clans. Malkavians, specifically Knights of the Moon, were already dope. In this book, they got crazy. Nosferatu have all sorts of really interesting tricks. Malkavians, again, because the other Malkavians are also way too good. There are a lot of really powerful clans, and the thing that makes the Tremere special to me is magic. They're just better at it than you. Lots of people are better at lots of other shit. It's not bad for you that someone is better at one thing, because the Tremere don't have Serpentis or don't have access to your whatever powers you have in your clan. I liked limiting Thaumaturgy on those builds because it meant that if you wanted to run those builds, you had to make some really hard choices. That said, I recognize that I think the majority of people like this edition. I understand why you like it, and I understand when you're looking at it from the approach of not playing a Tremere, cool. But mostly spite.
One thing I'll point out, and then I think this is a good point to move on to Bruja, where we will have a great deal to say, is a lot of this is also contingent on what paths they add. Because Thaumaturgy, we had one question, is there any time you need more than 4 Thom paths? And usually not. There are more than 4 good Thom paths, but they are good for very different reasons. And
if your sheet has Elemental Mastery, Conjuration, and Technomancy on it, you have 3 really good powers. But I'm very confused about what you think you're doing.
Now, one point is that one of your paths is chosen for you, if you are one of those 4 merit people. And if you want to be a Setite, Setites aren't a good example because they aren't a bloodline, and I don't think they got one of these. But if you want to be an Assamite sorcerer who is a plot chaser, you were stuck with Lure of Flames, and you got one path that you were interested in, and you could also set people on fire, which is dope.
It's a cool trick.
You're gonna have a good time.
It's a cool trick.
But you get 3 paths to play with. And if you're a plot chaser, you probably don't need all 3, but you can pick up Path of Blood for some extra blood spend, or for making blood fly through the air.
Because it's a cool fucking power.
Fucking time.
It's cool.
But yeah, Thaumaturgy is going to go through a little bit of a crisis in the meta. And exactly how large that's going to be is going to depend a lot on how restrained the writers are, in how many paths they put in, and how powerful they let them be. So we will see about that, but a lot of this discussion is contingent on what they do in 6 months.
That also goes back to, as we're about to go to Bruja, which, by the way, really is skipping a lot. Like, it doesn't sound like it's skipping like 7 or 8 pages. But yeah, it really goes back to
Vizier got pushed back.
Yeah. All of the stuff that I, have come to have a problem with in APOC, not all, most of it, are things that I figured out after I started playing it. All of the coolest tricks that I did, all the weird shit that I did on like Hunts the Broken and our Wildfire pack, those are things that came out of seeing the first couple of APOC games and watching a meta start to develop and watching the powers that did and didn't take people's interest. So it's worth noting that everything we say here might be nonsense. I'm trying to think of a good example a power in APOC that went that way. Or hell, fuck APOC. Conjuration used to be a garbage path of Thom.
Awakened Minor Spirit.
Oh,
We
Awakened
spent
Minor.
2 months.
We're not gonna-
in that path.
We're not gonna talk about Awakened Minor Spirit. A lot of people don't like me for that. But yeah, no, Conjuration is a shitty power that got good because of how it interacted with several other really, really good powers. So it's possible there's gonna be something in this book where we're like, oh, that's dog shit. And then it comes into play and just starts like eating 6th gens, and we're like, oh.
We are a sci-fi writer trying to predict the future. We'll get 1 in 10 things right, and then